Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar. You have stepped into a course that is going to change the way that you look at data. Not just how you analyze it, but also how you communicate it. My name is Nivid Desai. I serve as the Program Executive at Writing Studio IIT Gandhinagar. Welcome to Writing for Data Science. This course is at the intersection of analysis and communication. As all of us know, data analysis is not just about coding and models. It is about solving real-world problems. And that is exactly why every single thought that goes into solving those problems needs to be communicated. And not just to one audience, across multiple stakeholders. That is where this course comes in. This course prepares you with the foundations of writing, especially curated for data science. We will discuss audience analysis, critical thinking, logical reasoning, as well as storytelling that is native to data science. So join me on a journey at the intersection of numbers and narratives. I'll see you in class. Namaste, hello and welcome to Writing for Data Science. My name is Nivid Desai and we are on a journey to explore the interesting intersections between numbers and narratives. Today is yet another new beginning, not just of a new lecture, but of our final module in this course. This module is more reliant on the second word that I've been saying in my opening introductions. Narratives. This module is called Storytelling in Data Science. This module focuses on communicating the data outwardly to a diverse group of audiences through the means of storytelling. We are going to look at the rationale behind developing a storytelling mindset, the different techniques, structures, and strategies to design our data communication according to storytelling, and we will see how this looks like in real world with proper case studies, examples, and explorations of different projects. At the beginning of this module, I want to reinstate and restate how we view writing in data science. Rather than treating writing as the final task of our analysis, an afterthought once the analysis is complete, we treat it as a part of the thinking and design process. We have been doing this for every module that we have picked up, be it audience analysis, be it critical thinking and logical reasoning, or today's module, storytelling in data science. We have been doing the due diligence of looking at writing not only as a product, but also as a process in itself. Same thing goes for storytelling as well. It is not something that we do only when the push comes to shove and we have to start speaking. We need to augment our communication, our thinking, and our design process, each of them with the perspective of storytelling. As Cole Nafik said in Storytelling with Data, data doesn't speak for itself. We speak for it through stories. And that is the mark of a dynamic storyteller within the realm of data. We have been learning how to become dynamic communicators, and the last module is to go the extra mile, is to also become a data storyteller. You would have seen many such speakers in popular culture, going up on a stage at a TED conference or at an academic conference or at a product launch for a tech company. All of them would be talking about data, but with this charm and charisma of storytelling. In this module, we will try to explore how that gets done and how we can learn to become dynamic storytellers from the structures and thinking patterns that exist within narrative storytelling. Before we move forward, here's a reflection question to begin today's module. When you think of story, what comes to your mind? Can data fit into that image? I understand that most of us think of story as fiction, as fables, as fairy tales. But what if I tell you that data can fit into the image of a story? Would you like to reflect how? How does data fit into your perception of a story? Think about it, and I will get back to you with further thoughts on what storytelling in data actually means. So, with that, let us begin. What is storytelling in data science? At its core, storytelling in data science is the practice of crafting a coherent and compelling narrative from data. It involves framing the central message, selecting relevant data points, sequencing information logically, engaging the audience with context and clarity. All of these are components of a data story. We frame a central message with the problem at mind and the kind of solution that we are going to deliver for it. Then we select the relevant data points that we need to use to augment our data story. Then we sequence the information in a certain order to make sure that our story makes complete sense and entertains the audience. And in the end, we provide context and clarity to our audience so that they don't feel confused about how to make sense of the data that we have presented them. As we discussed previously, for most of us, stories mean fiction. Fiction means made up, imaginative, and fanciful stories that we have read and heard and enjoyed ever since we were children. But unlike fiction, these data stories are grounded in evidence. But much like fiction, they aim to move an audience. Just like our stories in terms of novels and short stories and fables, they move us. They make us feel emotional. They make us inspired. Just like that, the data stories also aim to move an audience, to change their understanding, to inspire action, or to clarify a complex issues. In this case, we have to ensure that our data story does not end up becoming just another recall of all that we did in our analysis. Because the final goal of a story is to ensure that the audience is engaged and inspired. Here's an example. Imagine that you're analyzing customer churn. You could say the churn rose by 12% this quarter. If you remember from the previous module, this is much like reporting the data. But if you want to tell a story, here's how it could be done. This quarter, we saw an unusual 12% rise in customer churn, particularly among new users in their first week. After exploring the data, we discovered that our onboarding emails were not reaching 38% of them. This gap may be costing us thousands in lost value. Notice how the second version tells a problem-solving narrative. It guides the audience through the problem, the kind of context for the problem, the recognition for why the problem exists, and what to do about it. It also tells you why the problem is critical to be solved. So not only does it inform you about what the problem is, it also inspires you to solve the problem because of the cost attached to it. This is an example of a good data story. Moving forward, I also want to talk about the power of narrative thinking, not just narrative writing in terms of storytelling, but also thinking from a narrative point of view. So, what do I mean by it? Narrative thinking is a mindset where you organize your ideas not just logically, but sequentially and meaningfully. Logic is something we have learned in the previous module, and we know how to maintain that underlying logic between all the different ideas that we communicate to our audience. But narrative thinking asks us to consider an advanced level of perspective. The sequence and meaning attached between each separate data point needs to come alive in a story sense. So, therefore, you move from a situation to a problem to a solution and to an implication. This is the movement that is not only logically sound but also sequentially meaningful. If you see, it moves in a pattern, it moves in a certain rhythm that tells you a story. This narrative arc is essential because humans process information best through stories, not through spreadsheets. Stories provide context, as in what is happening. They provide conflict, as in why does it matter? And in the end, they provide a resolution. What can we do about this? Without these components, a story may just be another report on paper. If you want the story to come alive, if you want the story to connect with your audience, these mindsets come together and form the basis of narrative thinking. If you include context, if you include conflict, and then lead towards resolution, this design of thinking helps you connect with your audience the very best. Let's do an exercise. You can pick one data set that you have worked with and frame a basic story using the following sentence. Once upon a time, as you know, all good stories begin with once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a dash. But then, dash. So, dash. This entire movement ensures that you first give context, then conflict, and then resolution. The first dash is about context, as in what is happening. The second dash after but then is about conflict. What went wrong? Why does it matter? And the last blank is about resolution. What do we do about it? This movement is best known as narrative thinking, a data story. Mind you, there is much more complication coming your way, so stick around for it. But this first exercise helps you get the grip of what a data story may look like in its bare minimum structure. Try to do this, and I will get back to you with further comments on why storytelling matters in data work. Now that we have understood the mechanics of narrative thinking, I hope that we cultivate this as we move forward in this module. Let us now explore the relevance and importance of storytelling within data work. I want to emphasize this because I understand that the two words that I've been using in my introduction, numbers and narratives, may seem to be at odds with each other sometimes. That if numbers tell you cold, hard facts, narratives kind of concoct a truth around that number. How come both of them can merge and come with storytelling in data science? I understand if that is a question that you might have. So let us see why storytelling matters in data science. First of all, stories create engagement. Even the most accurate data can fall flat if the reader does not care. Stories make data sticky, meaning a reader is more likely to engage with the data if it is wrapped, packaged in a story. They invite curiosity and emotional investment. This is something which is essential to retain the reader's attention. If you optimize your data presentation for curiosity, that means your reader will automatically want to know more about how the data is moving forward. And more so, the second part, the emotional investment, will ensure that your reader is inspired to take action at the end of your report. For example, instead of saying 34% of users dropped out, you can say 1 in 3 users tried to sign up and gave up. Let's find out why. This right here invites curiosity. It invites emotional investment. It tells you the same fact as the first sentence of 34% of users dropping out. But the approach is more of curiosity, is more of emotional investment. It is speaking to the audience in a way that they understand, and it asks them to care about the problem at hand. This is why storytelling matters in data science. It creates an engagement that is unlike any other that we have learned in this course so far. Secondly, stories make complexity digestible. A good story simplifies complexity without sacrificing nuance. It curates what the audience needs to know and leaves out what they don't need to know. This curatorial mindset is essentially only native to stories, because otherwise, spreadsheets after spreadsheets can communicate data which may not necessarily be relevant to the audience whom we are talking to. That's why every complexity that we offer to the audience needs to be digestible, needs to be entertaining without sacrificing nuance. We also learned this once again, if I may recall, in the very first module called First Principle Reasoning. Storytelling falls naturally within First Principles Reasoning because it selects what the audience needs to know and rejects what may not be relevant to them. Here's an example. When explaining machine learning results to executives, you don't need to describe the algorithm's math, but you do need to explain what it predicts, how accurate is it, and what actions it suggests. This is once again deciding based on the technicality and the non-technicality of your audience, and then making a conscious decision based on their levels of proficiency. And stories can make that detail stick to both these kinds of audiences, be it technical or non-technical. Thirdly, this is among the most important elements of stories. Stories inspire action. Data storytelling doesn't just inform, it influences. Policymakers, CEOs, product teams, all of them rely on insights that lead to decisions. And you, my dear data communicator, are the one who is responsible for these insights. Therefore, narrative builds momentum towards a recommendation. That kind of rhythm that needs to be established so that the final recommendation is actionable, it can only assure through stories. Here's a reflection before we move forward. Think of a time when someone explained something to you versus when someone told a story about it. Which stayed with you for a longer time? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that when somebody explained something to you had a different effect as compared to when somebody told you a story? That reflection will help us understand why is it that stories remain memorable even if a lot of time passes by. I will get back to you with the components of a data story very soon. Just like traditional stories, a data story also has components. We understand that a story cannot be a story without characters, complex plots, conflicts, and many such different things. Much like that, a data story also has components. For example, these components are not too different from a traditional story. Here's a simple breakdown. Characters. Who is involved? We know them as stakeholders as well: users, customers, cities, sensors, etc. These involvements don't necessarily need to be human. The characters can also be data points. The characters can also be machine learning algorithms. So, we have to think beyond the human boundaries of characteristic in order to define who or what is involved. Then there is a setting. What is the context? The time frame, the platform, the situation. Then there is the conflict. What problem arises in the data? Then there is evidence. What does the data say? And in the end, there is resolution. What action or insight emerges from the story? All of them may be similar to how a fiction story is told. However, the way that they play a role in a story may differ because they need to be relevant to the data. Here's an example of what this may look like in action. In January, our platform onboarded 10,000 new users, but nearly 40% left within 48 hours. Analysis showed that our tutorial video failed to load for users on Android 12. Fixing that bug restored retention to 78%, a significant recovery. This right here is a story. It begins with characters, it begins with setting, it then leads to conflict, it then leads to evidence, and then the resolution. All the aspects are covered within this little paragraph without sacrificing the attention and the curiosity of the readers. I understand that this may start looking a little mechanical, that if we have to start considering all these different points, all these different components, then it is just a building block puzzle. However, I don't want to only restrict our conversation about stories to the mechanical aspects of storytelling. I want writing as a way to discover the story. You often don't start with a perfect story. You write to find the story. As you start writing, it becomes a process of discovery. You refine the narrative as you work through drafts, organize your visuals, question your assumptions, and read your work aloud. All of this will help you tap into the essence of what the data is trying to say and why that story matters. If you connect all of this with our conversations so far in our previous modules, you will start seeing them as a perspective that emerges leading up to our conversation on storytelling. Here's an exercise for you before I conclude today's class. Write a 2-sentence story from the point of view of your data set. What would the data say if it could speak? I know this is a fun, creative kind of an exercise, but this is one such module where we start looking at non-technical communication in a rather creative bent as well. So, if your dataset could speak, what would it say? What would it communicate to its readers or to you, its writer? Try to think about it. Write a two-sentence story and see if this creative challenge fits well within your writing worldview. At the end of today's class, I want to introduce this idea that storytelling is a new lens for communicating data. It is not only a soft skill, it is a core analytical skill because it helps you make sense of your findings, it helps you communicate them to others, and it helps you guide the decisions with purpose. If it were not for storytelling, all of these may not be adequately enhanced within your communication. A data scientist who can tell a story is not just a better communicator, they are a better thinker. That is why, for entire module, we will be looking at storytelling as a core component of data science. That was it from my end for this lecture. We were introducing ourselves to the mindset of storytelling within data science. We looked at some components of the story and we saw some examples of what a story may look like within data science. In the next lecture, we will look at the structures that emerge from our pursuit of storytelling within our realm of data science, and we will see what they will look like in examples. Until then, all the best, keep learning and stay curious. I will see you in the next class. Namaskar.